I'd like to welcome you to our event on enhancing capacities and networks for women's leadership and adaptation action. We're really pleased to be holding it here at the Capacity Building Hub. So our event today focuses on the importance of women's leadership and national level policies and plans that are designed to build resilience to the impacts of climate change, including national adaptation plans. So we all know that women's leadership is essential for gender-responsive adaptation action, but women remain underrepresented at all levels of decision-making. So today we're going to discuss how capacities and networks can be enhanced to enable women's leadership in adaptation decision-making. And we'll also highlight the difference that this makes in ensuring that adaptation to climate change is gender-responsive. We have a great panel of speakers with us today. Two are joining us here in the room, and one will be joining us virtually. I think we're still working on getting the slides up. So my name is Angie Daze. I'm the lead for gender equality and social inclusion with the resilience team at the International Institute for Sustainable Development, and I'm also part of the National Adaptation Plan Global Network Secretariat, or the NAP Global Network Secretariat, and the Secretariat is hosted by IISD. So just to get started, I wanted to introduce the network for those who aren't familiar with us. So the NAP Global Network was established in 2014 to enhance national adaptation planning and action in developing countries. And as I mentioned, the Secretariat is hosted by the International Institute for Sustainable Development. And today we connect more than 2,000 adaptation practitioners and policymakers from around the world. We provide technical assistance to countries to advance their NAP processes. We bring partners together to learn from each other through peer learning and exchange. And we document and share lessons and good practices through original analysis and thought leadership on NAP processes. And gender has been a priority theme for the network since 2017. Since then, we've been able to support 19 countries to integrate gender considerations in their NAP processes, and we've brought representatives of 35 countries together to learn from each other about gender-responsive approaches in national adaptation plan processes. We also track progress on integration of gender in NAP processes at the global level, and we document guidance and good practice examples on how to take this forward. So to set the stage for the discussions, we just have a quick short video that explains in simple terms why gender matters for adaptation. Maybe if we're having difficulties getting the video up, Christian, I'll just move on, and we can either show it at the end or share a link later on. Great. So I want to start now by introducing our panel. To my right, I have Stella Oko, who's a Principal Administrative Officer in the Climate Change Department in the Environmental Protection Agency in Ghana. And I should say that the government of Ghana is a long-standing partner of the NAP Global Network, and we were very happy to have Stella and one of her colleagues participate in a peer learning summit on gender-responsive NAP processes that we held back in July. So we're very happy to have Stella here today. Joining us virtually is Lydia Wenjiku Kibandi, who is the CEO of Lensational, which is a nonprofit social enterprise that uses participatory photography to elevate the voices of underrepresented women. And the NAP Global Network has been partnering with Lensational to explore how we can bring women's voices into national adaptation plan processes using visual storytelling. And last but not least, we have Una Mae Gordon, who is the Regional Director of Caribbean Women in Leadership and an independent environment and climate change expert. Jamaica has also been a valued partner of the NAP Global Network. We've been working with Una Mae over the years, and including as a member of our steering committee. So what we're going to do is we're going to have lightning talks from each of our panelists, and then we'll have an opportunity to hear from you. So we really invite people to share your reactions or your own experiences around women's leaderships and building capacities and networks to enable that leadership to happen. So first, we're going to have Una Mae Gordon talking about mentoring and network building to enable women's leadership in climate policies. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Angie. And let me just thank the network and ISD for continuing to be a strategic partner to Una Mae. It is really very interesting that I find myself on a panel of this nature. And I'll begin by giving a little, the slides are giving me a problem. Just giving a little background to my journey here, being here all the time. I started in the climate agenda arena at COP6, and I leave it there. But over the years, recognizing that climate change is about three things. It is about politics, it is about money, and it is about people. And the two first ones are not controlled by us. But the business of the people belongs to the business of women. And so in that regard, and in that way, the business of women, then you talk about the leadership which did not exist at the time in climate action. And also that if you are going to take care of the business of the people, then you also need to insert yourself with the money. And while I had no interest at all in representational politics, it also means that we also have to understand the politics of climate change, and we also have to understand the politics of the countries in which we operate. So in that way, the positioning of oneself to understand and participate becomes important. And having entered the space, then you have to decide and deliberately decide that you're going to participate. You're going to participate actively, and you're going to pull people along with you. So the gap that you recognize that there were no women in the space, with you participating, you also have to help to fill that gap. And so many years ago, I decided that I was going to participate, but I was also going to help to fill that gap. When I entered, my mentor in the climate space was a colleague that I had from a project, Clifford, and most of you know in the climate space knew Clifford Marlong. And Clifford said, you have to come. And I'm like, come where? Clifford has been, as a man, a mentor for me in the climate space. And it is the first COP that I am, that Clifford is not here. But having had that, I also recognized that it was not enough. And so being in the space, being as a leader in climate action, Angie would not have mentioned that we have this network of women around the region. And so to insert climate change itself, but not only climate change, but everything else that has to do with women issues, but women in political participation, because that's where the leadership comes. And so the Caribbean Institute of Women in Leadership over the last 10 years I've been a member, a director across the region of real, complete volunteer organizations. And in the last 5 years, we have been able to insert climate change as part of the parliamentary process to ensure that the leadership at the level of the parliament is also taking place. And so having made that decision, then you have to also target the young people. And so really, really target the young people, not just the young people, but young women who you want to bring them along with you. So we have had over the years bringing the young women to the COP and deliberately bringing them and intentionally bringing them so that they can participate and just let them go in the space as I had been let go in the space and have to be. Having had the opportunity to lead the climate change agenda for Jamaica in the last 6 years as well, part of the gap that we saw was that gender was nowhere in the space at all. We have a climate change policy that gender was not mentioned at all. And so that was also part of the discourse. Using the power that is invested in you, and at the time the power invested in me was as lead of the climate change division in Jamaica. We need a gender policy, we need a gender and climate change strategy and action plan, and we need young people in the space to lead this. So just to ensure that that mentorship, which probably I got, people like Patricia Espinosa, people like Decima Williams from Grenada, who is back as the president of the Senate, who was there in the early days, who you saw in the space, but never interfaced with. You saw them on the screen. And so you said, but if they can be there. And in 2017, when I became the head of the climate change division in 2016, I thought then to learn more about the process. If I have to inform the process, if I have to inform the young people, I need to be more involved in the process and understand the process. Coming to COP alone and just being participating was not enough. It was not enough. Needed to get involved in the mechanism of the convention. So found myself on the bureau to understand really what it was. Found yourself co-facilitating so that you can actually inform the young people that this is what you need to do. And sometimes when you have leadership trust upon you, then that is probably one of the easiest things. So I keep throwing the young people in as part of my mentorship. You go here, you go there, you go there. It's probably the easiest way, but really intentionally dragging them along so that they can understand that sometimes really the power that you have, you really don't know. And I'll stop there, Angela, a little bit.
Thanks so much. Look forward to hearing more later in the session. So next up, we have a pre-recorded presentation from Lydia. Lydia isn't in Sharm el-Sheikh yet, but she is going to be joining us virtually for the discussion part. So Christian, can we cue up the video, please?
My name is Lydia Wanjiku-Kibandi. I am the CEO at Lensational, a non-profit social enterprise that uses participatory photography to elevate the voices of underrepresented women. The way that we do this is by equipping the women that we work with in skills and tools for photography storytelling so that they can document their lives and experiences around different issues, and then facilitating them with the platforms through which they can share their stories towards meaningful change for themselves and their communities. Over the years that I have been working with women from different communities, different countries, and different backgrounds, one of the most common threads that I have observed in their stories is their relationship with their environment, and as such, how they're being affected or how they're responding to changes in their environment as a result of climate change. What has been interesting to note is the difference in how different communities are being affected by climate change. And communities that are more significantly and severely feeling the impacts of climate change also happen to be communities where there seems to be more rigid and very entrenched gendered systems. And what this means is that women have the greater or the larger responsibility to manage and cope with the impacts of climate change, especially on their families and their livelihoods. And although this is the case, the women are often not aware of their place for participation within global and national level policy conversations. The way they talk about climate change is much in how they are feeling it and how they are being affected by it and how they're trying to cope on their own level, but they're not well aware that they should participate or that they can even participate in the decisions that affect them directly. And this is why it is very important for women on the front lines of climate change to be heard, because it allows them to have very meaningful participation on decisions that affect them directly. And without their voices, there are very key insights that will go missing in the formulation of these policies. It is, however, very encouraging to note that there are more deliberate efforts being put in place to bridge this gap and allow more participation for women on the front lines of climate change. The National Adaptation Plan Global Network has partnered with us to amplify the voices of underrepresented women in national adaptation plan processes. In this approach, which we have piloted in Kenya and Ghana, in collaboration with the respective governments, we equipped women from very underserved communities with skills and tools for photography storytelling, enabling them to document their lives and how they're being affected by climate change, as well as their visions for resilience. We then went a step further and brought the women and the policymakers from the respective governments in the same room so that they can have dialogue around the bodies of work that the women had produced. The power of visual storytelling in this process is in that it allowed for a more human face in a process that would otherwise be very rigid and technical. In the time that policymakers were observing these photographs and listening to the women, they were able to journey through the experiences of the characters and the subjects that were being displayed in front of them, placing them in the very environment and the context where these changes are happening and allowing them to feel and resonate on a much deeper level to the experiences that the women and the communities are having. And on the part of the women, where geography, language, education background would otherwise have been a hindrance or a barrier for them to communicate and reach policymakers, they then had this one universal language through which they are able to articulate their voices and their wishes to policymakers. And this really is the power of visual storytelling in facilitating dialogues. It creates a common language between people of very diverse backgrounds. What really struck me about the response by the policymakers was their reception. For people who had walked into that room ready for business and ready to leave, I observed a real change in their demeanor, in that they did not leave immediately, they lingered longer to absorb more of those images and to speak to the women much longer. One of the things that has stuck with me was a comment by the director of the Climate Change Directorate in Kenya, Mr. Thomas Lerenten, and he noted that without understanding what exactly policies are responding to, it becomes very difficult to effectively form policies that can address those challenges. In Ghana, we observed that policymakers were already identifying new vulnerable groups. In Kenya, the Climate Change Directorate is looking into ways of using the bodies of works and the photo stories that the women have produced to form part of the resources that will now sit in Kenya's Climate Change Resource Center, which is a really notable move and effort, because the Kenya Climate Change Resource Center is part of the current National Climate Change Action Plan. And I believe that this is a very notable and worthy of recognition effort in recognizing the role of women in national adaptation plan processes.
Thanks so much, Lydia, and I hope we'll be able to hear from you live shortly. So now I'm going to turn to Stella, who's going to talk about the role of peer learning in building capacities for leadership on gender-responsive climate action.
Good afternoon to you all, and I'm very happy to be here. Lydia, it's good to see you. It was good to work with you way back in Ghana. Yes, from our perspective as a developing country, statistics is always saying that women happen to be the majority of population in the world. Women's contributions are very significant towards economic and social productivity from where I come from. Yet, there is a big gap, and there is a reality. We are involved in household activities, in farming activities, in livestock. But then we happen to find ourselves in very vulnerable situations. I think by the culture that we have to practice in most of our setting has put us in subordinate levels. So we have situations where women cannot even speak for themselves. If they have to speak, they would have to go back to their husbands, and they come back to tell you what their husband says, and that is not a reflection of what they want to say. And then there are our cultural settings. We can't own lands from some of the places, so women always would have to ride on the backs of their husbands. Sometimes even the younger male in households who would have to determine whether they can even own lands for themselves. These people, this majority, young women and the woman at large who plays significant roles in our economy, have been disadvantaged greatly because of the barriers, the socio-economic barriers we are referring to. And then we feel that decision makers need to be really conscientized to inculcate women's and young women's vulnerability in decision making. This is very, very critical because the women, the majority we are trying to protect by bringing adaptation policies or interventions, if they are left behind, how do we really tackle that aspect of it? And sometimes it's so distressful. Women are representing what their husband says. Our decision makers are our husbands, because when they talk to us, that's what we come to say. Our public servants who take these decisions for us, our traditional leaders, and then we feel that they have to understand the need to bring women into this equation. Because if women are not in this equation, then the fight for adaptation, I think, is already losing its grounds. And so a conscious effort to also make sure that these women have their own space and right as well to be involved in this decision making, because they themselves who are involved are able to understand their situations better and could contribute effectively to how these vulnerabilities are captured in decision makers by policy makers. So women also deserve their rights. They have their space, because they would contribute to the climate impacts of what their vulnerabilities are. So I say that adaptation here, yes, critical to our decision makers. We need to take a conscious, very conscious effort to bring women who are most vulnerable into the fore, let their contributions count. There are times that because of cultural barriers, we have to deal with them separately to really understand what it is. Other than that, a one-fits-all will not solve some of our problems. So I had this opportunity to be in Jamaica this year to share experiences with my colleagues from other regions. You know, experiences and skills vary from geographics and expertise. And it was overwhelming what my experience was in Jamaica. So I had the opportunity to share, the vulnerabilities differ depending on where you come from. And so there were opportunities. Some of the vulnerabilities were similar. So then you could attest to the barriers that you have and share with people's experiences. I had the opportunity to communicate, and it was so fascinating that something that had never been considered from my perspective was shared, where people are looking at having a cultural resetting of the minds, especially with areas that have very rigid cultural barriers. So that if you begin to work on these cultural resetting of these minds, for them to even have, understand what adaptation options are and how they cater for these vulnerable groups, it will go a very long way to help. And so that experience in Jamaica, I think it's one of the best I've had in years. And then there were others where women are human-focused naturally. So if you happen to engage women, you realize that you don't even need to now set even a gender desk. Women will focus on all the marginalized areas and deal with them. So the need for the inclusion of these women to have their space to participate, I think it's very critical. And Jamaica gave me exposures and learning experiences way back here in Ghana. We have started the things that we never thought about. We are looking at the NAP process in Ghana, how is gender responsive. Okay, the NAP process itself has a framework where it's consciously taking into consideration gender responsive measures. And that is done through the framework that has been designed. The Ghana NAP is very friendly with issues of women and younger women and other marginalized groups. So what is happening is that through the various structures that we have made space. We have a steering committee group and have made space for women to contribute to the decision-making that happens with the NAP process itself. We have what we call the cross-sectorial policy groups. These are groups, we have 5 of these groups, and these are the technical hub that we use to formulate the NAP project itself. And in all of these 5 working groups, women are featured, gender, women issues, and younger women issues are featured in all of this space where they can contribute to the initial decision-making of even the NAP process. So we call them the cross-sectoral. So from beginning to end, they already have been factored. We are working with the district assemblies because, of course, the NAP will travel by asserting. It has a district-level systems that it has to play role in. And even before, we have just started the NAP. We are not up to the peak yet. But we'll be going to the districts as from next year. And then even before that, we have started engaging these district assemblies. We call them the gender desk. We have gender desk in all our district assemblies in the local setting where we are already engaging them in climate change and NAPs and gender. And this is to conscientize them because they are the decision-making groups at these local levels to make sure that in all of the decisions that are taken with the NAP process that happens at the district level is well catered for. And these interventions that we have done with the NAP process, I know that it's effectively going to make an impact because, like I said earlier, if these vulnerable groups that happens to be the majority of our populations are not given the needed attention, then we had better stop talking about adaptation. And this is what we are communicating to the decision makers to make sure that women and younger women with their vulnerabilities are adequately catered for. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Stella. And let's give a hand to all the panelists. So we're going to turn it over to you now, but I have a couple of follow-up questions. So maybe if we can get the mics, if anyone would like to make an intervention, you can put up your hand. But while we're getting that sorted out and getting the mics to the front, and maybe if we could bring, oh, Lydia's there, okay. So Unime, I wanted to start with you. If you could give one piece of advice to your younger self about how to become a leader in climate action, what would it be?
To my younger self, I think I would be a little bit more aggressive, if that is possible. Because, as I said, I got on the Bureau in 2017, and probably, to my younger self, I probably would have gotten involved in the mechanisms of the convention a little bit more. So you rolled along because you are in the space and you are in the community and so. And it was only when I was forced, I was forced to be on the Bureau. I was thrown on the Bureau because of some unknown force that I got involved. So I think that would be one of them, because unless you get involved in the mechanisms of the convention, I like to say inside the belly of the process, then you continue to just roll along with the punches and you get here. And sometimes the fight that you are fighting can be won in other way. And I'll give you an example. When I went on the Bureau, I realized that the representation of women on the convention mechanism was 3%. 3%. So that was one. Also recognize that there was a lot of the ethics. What is the name of that one now? The ethics and policy and so that we fixed that. I fixed that when I went on the Bureau, because there was guidance for presiding officers and guidance for participants. There was harassment over there. I fixed those things when I went on the Bureau, because I recognize you need one guidance for that one that you can scan at the outside of the building, the ethics and something guidance document. I fixed that. And my counterpart in fixing that was Ian Fry. So both of us from SIDS decided that we were going to fix that. Also set out in getting more women on the mechanism. So when I left the Bureau, we were up to 5%. With not a small, but a really very significant step from 3, because I was going around to the young women and saying that, well, you are going to be the representative on the KCI. What's the KCI? You don't need to know right now. You're the rep. You are going to be the rep and so and so. What is that? You don't need to know that. I'll tell you that afterward. You are the SIDS rep. You are the Gorlak rep and so and so. And therefore, to make sure that we had representation where it matters. And I think if I had to give one little piece of advice, I would have dragged a lot more young people to represent in some of the things that we were involved in, but also be more present in some of them.
Thanks so much. I hope our young people, young women are listening, and also people who are mentoring young women are listening about putting them forward. Does anyone from the audience want to come in with a comment or a question? Yeah, can we get a mic up at the front here, please? I'm going to come back to Stella and Lydia, but I thought it'd be good to hear from the room a little bit. Oh, I'll come to you next.
Test.
Maybe while we're figuring out the mic, I will go to Lydia and ask a question. So, Lydia, hopefully we can get Lydia up on the screen. You've worked with many women to document their stories of climate change. And if you could distill one key message about addressing gender and adaptation from all of these stories that you've heard, what would it be? Are we able to get our virtual speaker up? Okay, the mic is working. Hold that thought. If we can try to get our virtual speaker up while we're hearing from the room, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the presenters. Thank you very much, ladies, for sticking on this issue, climate change, because it's affecting us. I'm called Florence Kasule. I come from Uganda, but I work with Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, PACJA, but I'm leading the country chapter of Uganda. I'd like to thank whatever you've really mentioned. It's very important. But I'd like to ask something, because I've been in this struggle for some time. And we've tried to make the NAPs to mainstream gender in the NAPs. We've tried to advocate. But my challenge is, and I'd like to know how you've been handling it, maybe in Ghana or it is the real implementation, reaching to the woman, the farmer. The NAPs are there on the table, but the gender has been mainstreamed, but I'm failing to reach the woman. So how have you been handling this? Because we lobby, we try to be part of the process, but reaching the woman, governments reaching the woman is a challenge, still a challenge, which I would like to help us. How can we achieve this?
Stella, would you like to take that one?
Thank you very much, Uganda. Yes. Okay, so the NAP process in Ghana is just at the development stage. We'll move to implementation. But I'd still like to take this question. From the setting that we happen to find ourselves, even sometimes engaging the women are difficult. So you get to a community here, and then you can't speak to the woman till she goes back to the husband to ask permission to talk to you. So these are some of the barriers we have even noticed, even at this consultational phase. So we have developed different strategies because we don't have a one-fit solution to all of this. There are times we approach them, but then you engage them separately. There are times when they are even seated in the room with the men, even though they are portraying that the women have their own ways to speak. It is never the case. They cannot say anything. So we are devising strategies where we can engage these women separately from the men or from the barriers that they are confronted with. But we get to the implementation, to the planning stage is on, and it's mostly would translate down to the district level. And that is when we have started consulting with the district assemblies and to tell them what to do to build capacities in how they manage that. So at the time it will get to their implementation stages in these districts, I know that barriers would have been breached, and then we'll be able to get along with that. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks. I think we had an intervention here. Oh, I'll go here and then there. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Zeneida Rabdishta. I'm coming from Albania, and from 2 years I've been appointed as a focal point for gender and climate change for Albania. Actually, I had no idea about what the situation really was, and when Stella was sharing the story, 2 weeks before I came to COB, I experienced the same story. We were in a village of Albania recording. There was a young woman that we wanted to interview her and ask her what was the situation, how much was she affected from climate change. And she said, "Let me ask my husband if I can do this." And she was asking us, please don't show this on the TV here, we shouldn't show up a lot, and everything else. If we would talk to her without the cameras, she had so much information she would give us. So what I think it needs to be done is to go and talk to these women, not only those in the institutions, in the public institutions, but also the women in the rural area. Invite them, have like coffee with them, and also share the stories of their stories in high-level meetings or in the political instruments in order that they would be also beneficiary and that also they can have access to funds and how to change their lives. Regarding the gender and climate, the Minister of Tourism and Environment last year approved a guidance how to mainstream climate change into other policies. And it is very interesting what I heard about the story of Stella and also the story of Juan. Sorry, their name, yeah. And they were very encouraging, and as a young woman, they give me power to work a lot more and to also be as close as possible to these communities in my country. Thank you so much for all the support. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I'm going to go to Lydia now because I see we've got her back, and then I'll come to you. So Lydia, one key message that you would like to share based on all the stories that you've heard to inspire gender-responsive climate action? You're muted, Lydia.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you so much, Angie. And nice to see you, Stella. Nice to meet you, Name. If there is one key message, I can distill all the stories that I hear and see from the women. And I'm also really encouraged to hear that it's in the same, from Stella's and Yuname's long-term experience. They share the same sentiment, and that is addressing gender inequalities cannot be decoupled from addressing climate change. I believe that addressing gender inequalities is central to climate action, and nations that are able to manage and cope with the impact of climate change well and faster are also nations where women are able to manage and cope within those impacts. So that's my one key message. You cannot separate addressing gender equality from addressing climate change issues.
Thanks so much, Lydia. I think most people in the room would agree with that sentiment. I'm going to take one more intervention from the room, maybe two if we can fit them in, and then I'm going to come back to you two for last words.
So thank you for your words. So I would like to know what's your expectations in terms of women in climate action. What's your expectations for the output of COP27, and what's your hope or what do you want to see in COP28? Yani, what actions or output you would like COP27 to generate that we would consider the COP27 as a success? And what do you hope to see in COP28 or already happening? Yeah. Thank you.
Great question. Maybe we'll take one more question or comment, and then I'll hand it over to you two to answer that question and close us out.
Thank you. Catherine Allenson from Future Earth Limited. I've just completed the Commonwealth Secretariat Best Practice Guide for Gender Integration into the NDCs, which will be launched in this room on Friday at 1:15. And 2 recommendation points are to promote gender and climate focal points and make sure that they are well resourced to carry forward their work and their decisions. And secondly, to convene business leaders and governments to fast-track women into leadership roles. But the important joining point of those 2 is what are the behavioral mechanisms which we need to include as integral to climate action such that all genders engage with the discourse around gender inclusion for a just transition.
Do you want to go first?
So that's an excellent segue, because I think every time you're in the space and you get a pushback on the issue, the alignment of women's issue and gender issue, it gives you an opportunity to intervene in a very targeted way as well. And so for us in Jamaica, we have, as Stella said, a really very different cultural norms that exist. We have women leaders in Jamaica across the public sector. We had a woman prime minister, and so it's really very different. The challenge then is to make sure that 51% of the population know that they make up the 51%. And I think that is part of the role that we play. Here in the UNFCCC process now, I'm not sure, it's a well-kept secret that we have a network of women in the UNFCCC process that involved in the process, that was thrown in the process, that is in and out of the process. And we have formed ourselves into a network so that we can also help other women to integrate in the process at all levels. To help them to understand the space, and also for us as women in the process to support each other, because a lot of times people don't even think that you, as a leader, you need support as well, and I think that's also part of it. I'm going to go to the COP 2027. In terms of the expectation, we have come a far way from Lima. And Angie, the Lima work program is now strong. We have a whole pavilion almost talking gender issue throughout the week in this COP, and gender is integrated into the process. The report about gender integration in the NDCs and the NAP is a really big step going forward, and unless we, as I said, deliberately move away these barriers, then we will. I am heartened, having been involved in the process for so long, that progress has been made. Not where we want to be, but having women as executive secretaries, having women as having and understanding the role, and having the network. Going into Abu Dhabi, I think the network will build out itself. I think we need more young people. And I'm seeing my young people all over the space, all over the COP. You hear people waving. They're here. They've found themselves here. Really, you just have to remain. I said yesterday on a panel, the climate space is like Hotel California. Who know what that is? It's for us like Hotel California. And therefore, as women in this space, we checked in, we're not going anywhere. And so you can depend on us to enable, especially the young people. We have gender and climate change focal points in Jamaica. And we make sure that they speak to each other deliberately. Speak to each other, because before the gender ministry was concerned over there, the climate change was concerned over there. We make sure now, and that if I have to give one piece of advice to countries as well, is to make sure that both come together. It has to be a whole of society, and it has to be deliberate action going in. And, yeah.
Thanks so much. Sorry, we're almost out of time, so unfortunately I'm going to give Stella the last word, and then I will close us out. I'm sorry, I can't take more views from the floor.
Okay, thank you. So, in all of the discussions, women and young women are everywhere. In all the discussions we have had, it's highlighted that women are most vulnerable. But then, the women are still willing to play their role when they are given the opportunity. And then, almost all the experiences that we shared, making women vulnerable, telling us how vulnerable women are, what the barriers and everything are, the people I happen to find myself with in the same discussions were doing things in their small own ways in their countries to make sure that women and younger women's issues are factored when it comes to gender issues. So I think that one of the things is that the space, one given to women, we are going to make significant impact on the adaptation decision making that we want to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for being here. I think this was a really vibrant and interesting conversation. And I'm sorry we couldn't hear more from Lydia. The connection was a bit rough. But I think the message that I'm getting is that, if we want climate change adaptation to be gender responsive, women's leadership is essential. And there are so many ways that we can work towards that objective. We need institutional mechanisms. We need mentoring. We need informal networks of support. We need peer-to-peer learning. We need to use creative means to create space for dialogue. And we need to address social and cultural norms that play out in all of our own countries, institutions, communities, if we're really going to make progress on this issue. So I'd like to thank you all for being here today. Thanks to the Paris Committee on Capacity Building for hosting us, and I look forward to seeing you around the COP.